The sun hung low over the horizon, casting an orange glow across the sleepy town. The air was thick with the buzz of a summer evening, as the steady hum of tires on the highway faded into the distance. It was just another routine day in a quiet corner of the world, but the events that were about to unfold would make it anything but ordinary. The gas station on the outskirts of town was a familiar stop for travelers and locals alike. Its neon sign flickered in the dimming light, the hum of the pumps breaking the otherwise serene silence. For Sandra Bullock, it was a simple stop to refuel on her way back from a charity event in the next city. A woman of grace and humility, Sandra preferred the moments when she could blend into the background, not seeking attention, but always willing to lend a hand to those in need. Today, though, her usual calm demeanor would be tested in ways she could never have predicted. As she stepped out of her car and walked toward the gas pump, her eyes instinctively scanned the area. It was just her and a few other cars parked in the far corner of the lot. Or so she thought. A group of bikers, loud, brash, and with a reputation that preceded them, pulled in. Their motorcycles roared into the parking lot like a storm waiting to erupt. The leather-clad men dismounted with swagger, taking long, exaggerated strides toward the pumps, their eyes scanning the area like vultures. At first, Sandra didn't pay much attention. She was used to the occasional stranger's curious glance, especially when they recognized her from her movies. But this time felt different. The air had changed, becoming heavier. Sandra's instincts told her something was off. The leader of the group, a man with tattoos snaking up his arms and a scar across his face, let out a loud laugh as he approached the counter inside the station store. His voice was gruff, as if trying to intimidate anyone who dared get in his way. "Get out of the way, lady," he muttered, pushing past a customer standing near the door. "We need our fuel." Sandra, though used to her fair share of pushy encounters in public, felt a rising unease. She kept her head low, trying to avoid any unwanted attention. But the bikers weren't having it. One of them, tall with a mischievous grin, spotted her immediately. He snickered and made a beeline toward her, blocking her path. "Well, well," he said, his voice dripping with sarcasm. "Look who we have here. Sandra Bullock in the flesh. What's a big-time actress like you doing in a place like this?" Sandra didn't answer at first, keeping her face neutral, but she could feel the tension building. She wasn't going to let herself be intimidated. But the biker wasn't satisfied with just his words. He took a step closer, his body language menacing, pushing her further into the corner near the pumps. "Is this how the rich and famous live? Hiding out in places like this?" Before Sandra could respond, the sound of an engine revving broke the tension in the air. The bikers, sensing a shift, turned their attention to the motorcycle that had just pulled into the station, its sleek, black frame reflecting the fading sunlight. The rider dismounted slowly, his helmet obscuring his face. But it didn't matter. In that instant, a figure everyone in the area knew, but no one had recognized until now, stepped out of the shadows. It was Tom Cruise. Tom Cruise stood at the edge of the gas station parking lot, his figure slightly obscured by the evening's glow. The bikers hadn't noticed him at first. They were too absorbed in their own rowdy antics. But Sandra did. Her heart skipped a beat as she recognized the familiar silhouette. Tom wasn't just any actor. He was a living legend, one of the most respected stars in Hollywood. He had a reputation for both his on-screen action-packed roles and his real-life humility. But Sandra wasn't thinking about his movies or his fame at that moment. Her mind was focused on the tension brewing between her and the bikers. Tom was a rare kind of person, one who could step into any room and command attention without even trying. He didn't flaunt his status, but there was an undeniable presence about him. Even from a distance, Sandra could sense that this wasn't just an ordinary bystander. He wasn't the kind of man to ignore what was happening, especially not when injustice was involved. The bikers, still unaware of his identity, continued to harass Sandra. Their leader, the man with the scar and the tattoos, took a few steps closer, grinning like a wolf eyeing its prey. He enjoyed the power he held over others, especially women like Sandra, who were usually accustomed to getting special treatment. To him, this was nothing more than a game. "Isn't it funny, Sandra?" the biker said, his voice dripping with mockery. "1 minute, you're Hollywood royalty. The next, you're stuck at some dingy gas station just like everyone else. What happens when the cameras aren't rolling? When you're just another person, nothing special. Sandra clenched her fists at her sides, the anger bubbling inside her. She had been in this situation countless times before, whether it was in interviews or the constant judgments from the public. But something about this moment felt different. It wasn't just about her. It was about the way these men were treating her, as if her worth were defined by what they saw on the outside. Get out of my way, Sandra said, her voice steady but cold. She wasn't going to let them push her around any longer. She wasn't going to let them dictate her worth, not today. But as she took a step back, the biker leader stepped forward again, his demeanor aggressive. You think you can talk to me like that? You're just a pretty face with some fame. That's it, he sneered. Before Sandra could respond, the sound of boots crunching against the gravel broke through the tension. Tom had taken a few purposeful steps forward, his presence undeniable now. His movements were deliberate, slow yet powerful. The bikers finally turned to notice him. The leader of the bikers, still oblivious to who Tom was, looked him up and down, sizing him up. What do you want, old man? He barked. You got a problem with us? Tom's face remained calm, his eyes fixed on the leader with quiet intensity. There was no arrogance in his posture, but there was an unmistakable confidence, as if he had seen this kind of situation before and knew exactly how to handle it. He didn't need to prove anything. With a soft but firm voice, Tom spoke. Actually, I do have a problem. Not with you, but with how you're treating her. The sudden shift in tone caught everyone off guard. The bikers paused, trying to make sense of the situation. The leader scoffed, his smug expression faltering for a brief second. And who are you supposed to be? He sneered. Tom stepped closer, a glint of something dangerous in his eyes. He wasn't playing games. Someone who believes that respect should be given, not demanded. He said the words slowly, but with the kind of authority that could make a room fall silent. His gaze shifted to Sandra for a brief moment, offering her a look of quiet reassurance. Sandra felt something inside her stir. Relief mixed with something else, something deeper. She wasn't alone anymore. Tom hadn't just stepped in to stop the situation. He had quietly claimed his ground, standing up for the dignity that everyone deserved. The bikers were starting to realize they'd misjudged the situation. The leader seemed to hesitate, his earlier bravado cracking. He was used to intimidating people, but this felt different. Tom wasn't some pushover celebrity, easily cowed by insults. And Sandra wasn't backing down either. The tension in the air was palpable, thick enough that you could almost taste it. Tom's unspoken challenge hung in the balance, daring the bikers to make the wrong move. For a moment, the parking lot seemed frozen in time. The sun dipped lower, casting long shadows over the scene, the sound of distant engines humming softly in the background. But beneath the calm surface, an undercurrent of tension had built up, one that was about to explode. Tom didn't move. He didn't need to. His presence alone was enough to shift the power dynamic in the room. Sandra's pulse raced, but she remained calm, her eyes locked on Tom. She didn't know why he had chosen to intervene, but she knew one thing. He wasn't just here for the show. He was here because he believed in something greater than himself, something that transcended fame or wealth. And in that moment, the bikers seemed to sense it too. The leader of the group, still unsure of how to respond, gritted his teeth and let out a long breath. The fight, it seemed, had just gone out of him. Well, ain't you a tough guy? He muttered. But there was no venom in his words now. Only defeat. Sandra stood straighter, her back unbent. She had no idea who this man was, but for the first time that day, she felt a sense of safety wash over her. A sense of respect. It was something she hadn't felt in a long time. The bikers were still trying to piece it together, the confusion evident in their eyes. But Tom knew this game. And the lesson he was about to teach was one that no one would forget. The quiet tension was broken only when Tom spoke again. His voice soft but filled with undeniable power. Apologize to her, he said firmly, his gaze unwavering. The biker leader didn't respond right away. He looked at his group, who were all unsure how to handle the situation. But the leader, finally realizing he had been outplayed, turned back to Sandra, his shoulders sagging. I'm sorry, he muttered, his voice almost drowned out by the hum of the pumps in the background. And with that, the moment was over. The bikers filed out, leaving the gas station as quickly as they had arrived, their defiant attitudes now replaced with a quiet, reluctant retreat. Sandra stood there for a second, the adrenaline still coursing through her veins. She turned to Tom, who stood with the same calm demeanor he had before. "Thank you," she said softly, her voice a mixture of gratitude and confusion. "You didn't have to do that." Tom offered her a small, reassuring smile. "I know," he said simply. "But sometimes it's not about doing what you have to do. It's about doing what's right." The air around the gas station felt different now, charged with a silent energy that had only intensified after the bikers had left. The tension, though diffused for the moment, hung like a fog over the place. Sandra took a deep breath, still trying to shake the unease from the encounter, but there was a quiet sense of relief in her chest. Tom stood a few steps away, his posture relaxed, as though this was just another day for him. "Thank you again," Sandra said, her voice quieter now, with a hint of gratitude that hadn't been there earlier. Tom gave her a nod, his expression unreadable. "No problem." But as she tried to walk past him to get back to her car, something shifted in the atmosphere. Sandra paused for a moment, glancing back toward the street, her instincts telling her that the situation wasn't over. The bikers had left, but their presence still lingered in the air, like a storm that had yet to pass. And then she saw it. The same group of bikers was pulling back into the lot. At first it was subtle, a rumble of engines in the distance, a few bikes turning back onto the lot with almost deliberate slowness. But Sandra could see it in their eyes. The leader, the one with the scarred face, was no longer wearing that casual smirk. Now there was something else, something dark and full of intent. Sandra's heart rate quickened, but she stayed still. It wasn't fear. It was the growing realization that this moment might not be over. The bikers weren't just walking away in defeat, they were regrouping. "Tom," she said quietly, almost as if testing the waters. She turned to him, her face drawn with concern. Tom turned his head, his calm gaze locking with hers. His eyes softened for a fraction of a second, but his face betrayed nothing. "Stay close," he said simply, his tone firm. Sandra wanted to argue. She wasn't helpless. She could handle herself. But before she could say a word, the bikers were upon them, their motorcycles revving up louder than before as they parked in front of Sandra's car. This time, they weren't just retreating. They were confronting them head-on. "You really thought it was over, huh?" The leader's voice was colder now, filled with the kind of venom that only came with humiliation. "You've got a lot of nerve, old man," he spat at Tom, then turned to Sandra. "And you thinking you're special. You don't get to just walk away from us." Tom didn't flinch. He didn't even look rattled. But Sandra could sense the shift in him. He was calculating, weighing his options with the same precision he'd probably used on countless movie sets. But this was real. And it wasn't a movie. The leader of the bikers stepped forward, his hands balled into fists. "You think you can just show up and make us look weak? Huh. We don't like that. Not one bit." Sandra felt a rush of anxiety. The situation had escalated far too quickly. But she was trapped between the bikers and the looming sense that Tom was about to do something drastic. She knew Tom wasn't the type to back down, but this felt like a dangerous game. "What do you want from us?" Sandra demanded, stepping forward to face the leader, her voice steady despite the tension in her chest. "You've had your fun. Now leave." The leader's eyes darkened. "It's not that simple," he growled, his gaze flickering from Sandra to Tom. "You see, the thing is, we don't like being made to feel small. And you too, well, you're making us feel small." The bikers weren't just challenging Tom or Sandra. They were making a statement, one fueled by their bruised egos and the need to assert dominance. Tom's hand subtly moved toward the small pocket on his jacket, where the familiar bulge of his phone rested. But before he could reach for it, the leader spoke again. "We could have left, sure. But now it's personal." It was then that Sandra realized the true depth of the situation. This wasn't just about pride anymore. These men were dangerous, and they weren't going to leave until they'd made a point, until they'd forced some kind of revenge or satisfaction. But Tom wasn't backing down. The motorcycles roared to life again, their engines revving with the energy of predators. Sandra could feel the vibrations through the soles of her shoes, the intensity of the looming confrontation mounting. The bikers began to circle them, taking their time to taunt and jostle each other, as though building up for some larger conflict. It was like watching wolves encircle their prey. But this time, Sandra wasn't alone. Tom remained calm, his eyes scanning the bikers one by one. He wasn't worried. No, Tom was never worried. But Sandra couldn't shake the uneasy feeling creeping up her spine. Something in the way the leader eyed her. It was unsettling. Without warning, one of the bikers, a tall, lanky figure with a patch over one eye, strode toward Sandra and stood just a few inches away from her. His breath reeked of alcohol, and his gaze was both wild and predatory. Sandra stiffened, instinctively taking a small step back, but the biker mirrored her movements, stepping in closer, blocking her retreat. His hand shot out suddenly, grabbing her wrist with surprising force. Before Sandra could react, Tom's voice cut through the air, low and unwavering. "Let her go." The biker smirked and ignored the warning, his grip tightening. "What are you gonna do about it, huh? You've already embarrassed us once." Tom didn't respond with words. Instead, he took one quick step forward, his fist flying with lightning speed. The punch landed with a solid thud, knocking the biker off his feet and sending him sprawling backward onto the pavement. The others immediately moved into position, their expressions now shifting from rage to disbelief. They weren't prepared for the sudden aggression, not from someone who, to them, seemed like just another celebrity. But Tom had a reputation for never backing down. He'd fought his way through countless obstacles before, and he wasn't about to stop now. But Sandra could see it now. The bikers were starting to form a plan. They were dangerous. They weren't just angry anymore. They were calculating how to turn the tables. They'd underestimated Tom, and now, the consequences were going to be worse for all of them. Sandra's thoughts raced. She wasn't sure how to get out of this, how to defuse the situation. But one thing was clear. There was no easy escape from the escalating storm that was about to consume them both. The conflict had only just begun, and this time, Tom might not be able to handle it alone. The punch had barely landed, but it was enough to shift the tide of the situation. The biker Tom had struck didn't get up immediately. His body remained crumpled on the asphalt, and the air grew thick with tension as the others assessed the unfolding chaos. For a split second, everything seemed to pause, frozen in time. Sandra's heart raced as she stood there, her mind scrambling for a way to navigate this nightmare. The bikers, now visibly enraged, quickly formed a half-circle around Tom, their faces hard with anger. The leader, who had been quiet for a moment, let out a dark laugh. He stood still, eyes narrowing as he scanned the scene. "You really think you're tough, huh?" The words dripped with venom. "I don't care who you are. You're gonna regret messing with us." Tom didn't flinch. His eyes remained steady, calculating. He wasn't about to show weakness, not now. Sandra could see the change in him. He wasn't just the calm, distant movie star anymore. The sharp focus in his eyes told her he was thinking several steps ahead, preparing for whatever came next. But the intensity of the bikers' reaction made Sandra uneasy. They were on edge, and when people like this felt threatened, anything could happen. Then the leader made his move, signaling the others to circle closer. The bikes roared back to life, their engines revving as they inched forward. Sandra instinctively took a few steps back, but she was already trapped. Her car was behind the bikers, and the surrounding gas station lot didn't offer an escape route. Tom was still standing in front of her, shielding her without hesitation. For a moment, Sandra wondered if there was any way out of this. She wasn't helpless, but she also knew that facing a group of bikers, even one as intimidating as Tom, wasn't something most people could easily overcome. "Get out of our way," the leader growled, pointing at Tom. "You don't know what you're messing with." Tom didn't move, didn't say a word. He simply stood there, his posture radiating calm authority. The biker with the one-eyed patch, the one Tom had knocked down, was starting to stir. He slowly got to his feet, his face twisted in fury, and with a screech of tires, he revved his bike and darted forward, attempting to intimidate them. His motorcycle screamed as it cut through the air, the bike weaving dangerously close to Tom. Sandra's breath caught in her throat as she watched, the sound of the engine drowning out everything else for a brief moment. Without warning, the biker swerved at the last second, clearly trying to knock Tom off balance. The tires squealed, and the moment stretched into an agonizing eternity. But Tom was too quick, his reflexes honed from years of experience. In one smooth movement he sidestepped, and the bike crashed into a nearby gas pump, sending a loud explosion of sound echoing through the lot. A shockwave of force rattled the ground beneath their feet. The bikers screamed in fury, realizing they were no longer in control. This wasn't just some celebrity trying to escape a confrontation. This was someone who was as dangerous as they were reckless. The leader, his face a mask of rage, looked around at his crew, his eyes wild with fury. "You don't get to walk away from this. Not now." The situation had escalated beyond anything Sandra could have anticipated. She had hoped this would blow over quickly, that maybe it was just a misunderstanding, but there was no turning back now. The bikers were more than angry. They were humiliated. They wanted blood. Sandra turned to Tom, her voice barely a whisper. "What do we do now?" Tom met her gaze. "Stay behind me. I'll handle it." But even Tom's confidence couldn't change the fact that they were surrounded. The bikers weren't just angry anymore. They were playing for keeps. The leader had already signaled the others, and now they were preparing to fight. Sandra's heart pounded in her chest. She had no doubt that Tom could hold his own, but she had a sinking feeling that this situation was about to get a lot more dangerous. Meanwhile, Sandra could feel a shift in the air as something deeper, something more dangerous, began to unfold. While the confrontation with the bikers had seemed like the central conflict, she was beginning to realize that it wasn't just about Tom and the gang of bikers. Something else was brewing, something more personal, more underhanded. As Tom's focus narrowed on the bikers, Sandra caught a glimpse of the gas station attendant, a young woman with short blonde hair. Peering out from behind the counter, her expression filled with fear. Sandra noticed the woman's anxious glances toward the parking lot entrance. She was looking toward a silver sedan parked nearby, its tinted windows casting a shadow that obscured the occupants inside. Sandra's curiosity flared. Who could be in that car? And why did the attendant seem so nervous? Before she could process the thought, the situation took another dark turn. The biker leader, seeing that his crew couldn't intimidate Tom with their threats, took things to a new level. He grabbed a crowbar from his motorcycle's storage and advanced toward Tom, his face twisted in cold determination. Sandra's eyes widened, and a chill ran down her spine. She'd seen enough movies to know what was coming. This wasn't just a fight anymore. The bikers were preparing for something far worse, something dangerous. The stakes had shifted. Now it wasn't just about proving a point. It was about asserting control. But even as the leader advanced, Tom didn't seem worried. In fact, there was an eerie calmness in his eyes. He stood there, his fists clenched at his sides, his every movement deliberate. As the leader swung the crowbar at him, Tom dodged with almost inhuman precision, ducking low and moving with the ease of someone who had faced down worse odds before. The crowbar sliced through the air where Tom had been standing just moments ago, and with one fluid motion, Tom grabbed the weapon mid-swing. He twisted it out of the leader's hands, sending it flying into the gas station lot. Sandra's heart raced as the tension soared. The bikers were losing their grip on the situation. The air crackled with hostility. But now, for the first time, Sandra felt something shift, a sense that they might not be entirely helpless. But she wasn't sure how long that sense of control would last. The bikers were on the verge of losing their composure completely, and when people like that snapped, it wasn't pretty. This wasn't just a fight for pride. This was personal. As Tom faced the gang leader once more, Sandra realized there was no going back. What had begun as a random act of harassment had now turned into a full-blown standoff, one that neither of them could easily escape from. And in that moment, she knew this wasn't just about surviving the bikers. It was about surviving what came next. The air felt thick, as if every breath was a struggle. Tom stood face to face with the biker leader, the others watching in tense silence. Sandra, her back pressed against the cold metal of the gas station wall, felt the world narrow down to this one moment, the stillness before the storm. The leader, his knuckles white around the handle of the crowbar, slowly stepped toward Tom, eyes narrowed with seething rage. His crew, now sensing that they were on the edge of something bigger, grew more restless. The tension was palpable, too thick to cut through with anything less than sheer willpower. Sandra could feel her heart in her throat. What had started as a simple interaction at a gas station had spiraled into a nightmare. She had no idea how Tom had ended up here. No clue how he was so calm. But one thing was clear. He wasn't backing down. Tom's eyes locked on the leader's, his stance unwavering. The leader was all bluster, fueled by pride and anger. And yet Tom remained the eye of the storm, a silent force that dared anyone to challenge him. Sandra, despite her fear, couldn't help but admire the quiet strength radiating from him. He wasn't just a celebrity here. In this moment, he was the only thing standing between her and a chaos she couldn't hope to control. The leader's voice broke the silence, a low, menacing growl. "You really think you can stand up to us? You're nothing but a washed-up has-been, a pretty face. I'll take you down like I've taken down hundreds before." There was a cold, unsettling humor in his words, a false bravado that made Sandra's stomach twist. Tom's eyes remained fixed, unwavering. As he leaned slightly forward, his tone deliberate. "You're not even worth my time." The words were simple, but they carried weight. A quiet declaration that he had nothing to prove to someone like the leader. The reaction was immediate. The leader's face twisted with fury, his lips curling into a snarl as he took another step closer, swinging the crowbar toward Tom's head. But Tom was faster. In an instant he sidestepped the blow, his body moving with the fluidity of someone who had honed their instincts for years. The crowbar missed by inches, and the leader overextended, losing his balance. With a sudden movement, Tom gripped the leader's wrist, twisting it sharply. The crowbar dropped to the ground with a loud clatter. For a moment there was silence, absolute stunned silence. The leader stared at his empty hand, the weapon now out of his reach. His face was flushed with rage, but his breathing was uneven, clearly stunned by the sudden loss of control. The other bikers, unsure whether to rush in or hold back, hesitated. Sandra's heart beat louder, thumping against her chest. The bikers were still a threat. There were still 5 of them, each unpredictable, dangerous in their own way. But the tide had shifted. Tom had made the first move. He had taken control. The sense of dominance that the leader had held over the situation seemed to crumble in an instant. The leader, now realizing that his intimidation tactics were no longer effective, looked around frantically for any way to regain the upper hand. His eyes darted between his gang and Tom, as if searching for the right words to salvage his pride. "What the hell are you?" he spat, anger boiling over into frustration. "You think you can walk away from this?" Tom's voice was calm, collected. "You're out of your depth. This doesn't have to go any further." But the leader wasn't listening. His pride had already taken too much of a blow, and now the only thing left for him to do was make an example out of Tom, to remind everyone in the parking lot that he wasn't someone to be trifled with. With a snarl, the leader lunged, attempting to tackle Tom to the ground. It was a desperate move, one that betrayed just how far he had fallen from his position of power. But Tom was ready. In a fluid motion, he sidestepped again, causing the leader to stumble forward off balance. Tom, using the momentum, grabbed the leader's jacket and twisted him into a harsh throw, sending the biker crashing into the side of a parked car. The loud crash echoed in the stillness of the gas station, the sound of metal against metal ringing out like a warning shot. For a split second, it seemed as if the leader might be down for good. The air hung heavy with the aftermath of the impact, the bikers frozen in disbelief. The rest of the gang was now on edge. Their leader sprawled on the pavement, nursing his pride more than his injuries. Tom stood over him, his stance still relaxed but his eyes cold. "This isn't how this ends," Tom said, his voice low. "You walk away. Now." The bikers, who had been silent up to this point, now looked to one another for guidance. The leader groaned on the ground, his face contorted in pain and humiliation. This wasn't how he had imagined things going down. He had thought his gang would intimidate Tom, thought they could bully their way into control. But now the power balance had completely shifted. Sandra's mind raced, but there was something about Tom's calm that gave her hope. She had never seen anyone handle a confrontation like this. It was as if he had anticipated every move, every reaction, and was always one step ahead. But as Tom stood there, poised and commanding, something far more troubling caught Sandra's attention. From the corner of her eye, she saw movement, a car engine roaring to life in the distance. A silver sedan, the one she had noticed earlier, now revved its engine. It began to pull toward the gas station with an unnatural speed, and Sandra could see the dark shape of someone inside, watching the scene unfold. "Stay back," Tom ordered sharply, noticing her gaze. His voice had shifted, becoming more alert. His instincts were sharp. Something was wrong. The sedan screeched to a halt just yards away, its tinted windows blocking the view of the driver. Sandra's stomach twisted into knots. This was no longer just a problem with the bikers. There was someone else here. Someone who had been watching them. And Tom was beginning to understand that the stakes were higher than he had originally anticipated. The bikers, still dazed by the sudden shift of power, now looked around nervously. But Tom's focus was on the car, on the mysterious presence that had just made itself known. The danger was far from over. The tension in the air grew thick as the sedan idled, its engine purring like a predator waiting to strike. Sandra's breath caught in her throat as she realized that this was no ordinary car. It was the harbinger of something far more dangerous. Tom, now fully aware of the looming threat, didn't flinch. His calmness had transformed into a focused intensity that emanated from every inch of his body. He wasn't just a bystander anymore. He was the shield standing between Sandra and whatever was coming. The leader of the bikers groaned, slowly getting to his feet, his pride wounded more than his body. The gang, now less certain, shifted their attention from Tom to the sedan. Whispers began to travel among them, their resolve wavering in the face of the unknown. "Who the hell is that?" one of the bikers muttered, his voice unsure. Tom didn't respond immediately. Instead, he stepped toward Sandra, putting himself between her and the car. His voice, low and controlled, reached her ear, steadying her nerves. "Stay close to me. Don't move." Sandra nodded, feeling a strange sense of security from his presence, even as her heart raced with uncertainty. The situation had spiraled so quickly, and yet here they were, standing at the edge of something bigger than either of them had expected. The sedan's door opened with a slow, deliberate creak. A figure emerged, tall and imposing, wearing a dark suit that contrasted sharply with the casual chaos around them. He wasn't someone Sandra recognized immediately, but there was something unsettling about his demeanor. His sunglasses shielded his eyes, but the air around him seemed to crackle with authority. Tom's jaw tightened as he observed the newcomer. He had seen men like this before, men who didn't come to a scene like this by accident. They came with purpose. The stranger's eyes flicked over the scene, taking in the bikers, the scattered gas cans, the bruised leader still struggling to regain his bearings. And then his gaze landed on Tom. "Tom Cruise," the stranger said, his voice smooth, though with an undercurrent of something dangerous. "I didn't expect to find you here." Tom didn't flinch. His body was still, but the intensity in his eyes matched the stranger's. "I could say the same, but I'm not here for you." The stranger gave a cold smile, but there was no humor in it. "You should be. You're in the wrong place at the wrong time." The biker gang, still recovering from their earlier confrontation with Tom, now seemed to shrink under the weight of the stranger's presence. It was clear they knew this man, or at least feared him. They took a cautious step back, whispering among themselves. Sandra felt a chill run down her spine. This was no random encounter. The biker gang had been a nuisance, but now it seemed like a much larger game was in play. Tom took a step forward, his body relaxed but his posture demanding respect. "This doesn't concern you. Whatever game you're playing, you've already lost." The stranger's smile widened, but his eyes remained cold. He took a step toward Tom, his presence overwhelming. "You misunderstand, Tom. I'm not playing games. I'm here to end them." Before Sandra could react, the biker leader took a half step forward, still aching but emboldened by the arrival of this mysterious figure. "What is this? You bring in some hired muscle to do your dirty work." The stranger glanced at the leader, his expression unreadable. Then, in a move so swift it was almost imperceptible, He reached into his jacket and pulled out a small device. It looked harmless, just a simple ordinary gadget. But when he pressed a button, the sound of an engine revving loudly echoed from the distance. Tom's eyes narrowed. He recognized that sound. The bikers didn't seem to know what to make of it. They glanced nervously at each other, unsure of the shift in dynamics. A few seconds later, a sleek black motorcycle screeched to a halt just behind the sedan. The rider dismounted, a tall figure clad in black leather, their face hidden behind a helmet. The arrival of the motorcycle didn't just add another layer of danger. It confirmed Tom's suspicion. This was no mere coincidence. The person who had arrived was connected to something far deeper than what any of them could imagine. Tom's gaze flickered to the biker gang, then back to the mysterious man. He knew what this was now. He had walked into a trap, but he wasn't going to run. Sandra's voice broke the silence, her words trembling but firm. What is this? Who are these people? Tom didn't look at her. His focus remained squarely on the man in the suit. You want to make your move? Fine. But this stops now. The stranger tilted his head, as if considering Tom's words. Then, his lips curled into a small, dangerous grin. You've misjudged me, Tom. I don't want to fight you. I'm here to offer you a deal. The words hung in the air, like a weight that nobody was sure how to bear. Tom's body tensed. He wasn't interested in deals. Not with someone like this. But the stakes had never been higher, and with Sandra at his side, Tom knew he couldn't back down. Not now. The biker gang, sensing that things were taking a turn they hadn't expected, began to murmur again. The leader, bruised and beaten, clenched his fists as he tried to regain control of the situation. He wasn't used to losing power, and his pride was his most dangerous weapon. Enough, he shouted, his voice cracking with fury. We're not leaving without our share. Tom's eyes flickered briefly to Sandra, then back to the stranger in the suit. It was clear the situation was unraveling faster than anyone had expected. It wasn't just about the bikers anymore. The stranger, whoever he was, had set something into motion, and it was only a matter of time before the full scope of the danger revealed itself. The time for negotiation had ended. It was time to end this, once and for all. The air around the gas station seemed to crackle with the tension of 100 unspoken thoughts. The bikers, now fully aware that this wasn't just a random encounter, stood uneasily as they surveyed the newcomers. The strange man in the suit, the mysterious motorcycle rider, and Tom, whose quiet composure gave nothing away. Sandra could feel her pulse racing in her veins, but there was something about Tom's presence that anchored her. It was as if, in that moment, everything else faded into the background, and only Tom remained, a steadfast protector. Enough games, Tom said, his voice calm but carrying an undeniable authority. His eyes locked onto the stranger, who still stood at the head of the group, watching everything unfold with an unsettling calm. Let's stop pretending like we don't know where this is going, Tom continued, his words deliberate, cutting through the tension. You want something, so why don't you just say it? The stranger raised an eyebrow, his lips curling into a thin smile, though there was no warmth in it. You always were good at seeing through the layers, Tom. I suppose that's why they sent me to take care of you. Who is they? Sandra finally spoke, her voice filled with a mix of curiosity and fear. The man turned his gaze to her for the first time, sizing her up. You don't need to worry about them. Not yet anyway. His gaze lingered just a moment too long, making Sandra uncomfortable. He could sense her growing unease, but his eyes slid back to Tom, who had been observing every move with increasing clarity. There was something more behind this situation, something that Tom had known deep down from the beginning. This was no ordinary encounter. Listen, Tom said, taking a step toward the stranger. You think you can intimidate me, but this isn't just about power or threats. You don't know what you're dealing with. I'm not afraid of you or your so-called deal. For a second, a flicker of emotion passed through the stranger's eyes. His mask of cool indifference cracked just slightly, revealing something darker. The silence that followed was suffocating as the gang of bikers remained stiff, caught between their loyalty to the stranger and the realization that this could go sideways in an instant. One of the bikers, emboldened by the momentary lapse in the stranger's stoicism, took a step forward. His leather jacket creaked as he moved, but he quickly realized his miscalculation when Tom's eyes locked onto him. Tom's expression hardened, and the biker faltered, retreating back into the fold of the group. Sandra could see the shift, the doubt that was now creeping through the biker gang. They had initially been full of bravado, confident that their leader and their numbers could overpower anyone. But Tom had made them question that. The man in the suit was unsettling, but Tom's quiet, controlled power was something none of them had been prepared for. "Let's finish this," Tom said with finality, his eyes now scanning the gang one by one. The stranger, however, raised his hand in a smooth, almost theatrical motion. "We don't need to resort to violence just yet, Tom. This can be settled without further bloodshed. All you need to do is listen to me for a moment." Tom stared at him, unimpressed. "I'm listening." The stranger took a breath, clearly calculating his next move. "There's a bigger game at play, one that you're clearly too caught up in to see." He paused, glancing over at the bikers, who were no longer sure of where they stood. "You think this is about some random gas station confrontation? About bikes and petty power struggles? No, this is far beyond that." Tom's instincts were sharp, and every word from the stranger's lips only confirmed the growing suspicion that he had been walking into something dangerous. Something that had been planned far longer than he had anticipated. "You want a deal, don't you?" Tom's voice was steady, but his eyes were now filled with a fiery resolve. "A deal that will benefit you and everyone in your little circle. But not everyone in this situation deserves to walk away unscathed." The stranger's grin widened, as though Tom had finally caught on to something he had been carefully hinting at. "You're smarter than I thought," he admitted, taking a step closer to Tom, his words now more personal. "But in the end, you still don't understand the true stakes. The game has already started, and you're either going to play by my rules, or you'll become a casualty of it." The biker gang shifted nervously, watching the tension between the two men escalate. It was no longer just about the bikes or the money. There were far larger forces at work, and both Tom and Sandra were caught in its web. Sandra, feeling the weight of the conversation and the danger surrounding her, stepped forward, her voice cutting through the charged atmosphere. "What do you want with us?" "Why us?" For a moment, the stranger hesitated, as if weighing his response carefully. But then he sighed and shifted his gaze back to Sandra. "It's not just you, Miss Bullock," he said, his tone darkening. "This involves people far more powerful than any of you can imagine." Tom's eyes never left the stranger's, sensing that the moment was approaching, when the truth would be revealed. He was ready. Whatever the stranger had in mind, he wouldn't let it play out. Without warning, the sound of a distant engine echoed across the gas station. It was growing louder, and as the figure stepped from the shadows, all the pieces began to fall into place. Tom glanced at Sandra, who met his eyes, the unspoken understanding passing between them. Whatever was coming next, they would face it together. The stranger stiffened at the sound, his face darkening as the final reveal seemed to inch closer. Something told Tom that this was about to be a confrontation that no one had anticipated. The roar of the engine grew louder, shaking the ground beneath them. Tom's gaze darted toward the source of the noise, but before he could react, a sleek black motorcycle slid into the gas station lot with a speed that made the air crackle. The rider dismounted with a fluid grace, his silhouette tall and imposing under the glare of the gas station lights. Sandra's breath hitched. She didn't know who this new arrival was, but his presence alone told her that the game had just shifted. The stranger in the suit's expression faltered, his calm facade cracking slightly. He hadn't expected this. The rider pulled off his helmet, revealing a face that Sandra would never forget. Tom's eyes widened slightly. The man was none other than a key figure in the world Tom had tried to leave behind. A world of power, corruption, and danger. Well, if it isn't the man himself," the stranger in the suit muttered, a mixture of relief and apprehension creeping into his voice. Tom didn't flinch, his gaze steady, knowing full well that this final piece of the puzzle had now arrived. The biker gang was watching the new arrival with awe and trepidation, unsure of the power dynamics at play. The rider walked toward Tom, and a brief but powerful exchange passed between them, silent, but filled with decades of history. Without a word, The rider looked toward the bikers and with a swift gesture, motioned them to step back. The message was clear. This wasn't their fight anymore. Enough, the rider said, his voice sharp. This ends now. The bikers, realizing they were no longer in control, hesitated. Their leader, still bruised from the earlier confrontation with Tom, shot a glance at the stranger in the suit. But no words were spoken. It was clear the tables had turned. Tom took a step forward, closing the distance between him and the man in the suit. I warned you, he said, his voice low but filled with a quiet intensity. Whatever game you thought you were playing, it's over now. The man in the suit gave a small, defeated nod, his arrogance slipping away with every passing second. I thought I had it all figured out, he murmured, his earlier bravado now gone. But I underestimated you, Tom. I should have known better. Sandra, who had been watching this all unfold, now realized the true depth of what had been happening. What she had initially perceived as a random encounter was anything but. She could see that Tom wasn't just some guy trying to stop the bikers. He was part of something much bigger, and this moment had been set into motion long before they had crossed paths. Tom turned toward Sandra, his expression softening as he made sure she was safe. She gave him a nod, a silent acknowledgement of the trust they had built in these last few hours. You're okay now, Tom said, his voice reassuring. The biker gang slowly started to disperse, their sense of power crumbling with the arrival of the rider. The man in the suit exchanged one last look with Tom, and for the first time, his mask of control had fully fallen. As the dust settled, the stranger in the suit finally spoke, his tone quieter, more reflective. I thought power was everything, he said, his voice barely above a whisper. But I see now that it's not. It's about respect. And I failed to give that. Tom didn't offer him sympathy. There was no need for it. You still have time to make things right. But it's not about making deals. It's about actions. You'll have to live with what you've done, just like everyone else. The man's face twisted in a moment of self-awareness. He nodded slowly, defeated, and took a step back. Tom turned to Sandra, a small, reassuring smile crossing his face. Let's get out of here. As they walked back toward the car, Sandra couldn't help but feel a deep sense of relief, the weight of the tension finally lifting. The confrontation was over, but the impact of what had just occurred would stay with her. Tom, as always, remained humble. Despite everything, his quiet strength, the power he had just wielded, he was the same man who had stood beside her, offering help when it was needed most. The bike gang was gone, and the danger had been neutralized, but it was Tom's actions, not his words, that spoke volumes. Sandra glanced at him, feeling the full extent of the lesson she had learned in these past few hours. It wasn't about how much power you had, or how intimidating you could be. It was about doing what was right, even when the odds were stacked against you. It was about standing firm when the world tried to break you down. And in that moment, as they drove off into the night, Sandra knew that she had witnessed something truly extraordinary. Not just a story of survival, but a lesson in humility, strength, and resilience. Because sometimes, the greatest heroes are the ones who never boast about their power, but instead quietly change the world around them. And Tom Cruise, for all his fame and achievements, had just proven that once again.